interrupting our planned schedule for the Communists of America podcast for a special episode because UAW Local 4811 has called a political strike. This is a union that represents 48,000 workers, academic workers at the University of California system, and they have gone on strike because of the brutal repression of the Gaza solidarity encampments in the UC campuses in California. And so to discuss more about why this is such an important turning point for the Palestine solidarity movement and for the labor movement in the United States, we have Tom Trottier and Antonio Balmer here with us. And we also will have a special guest, comrade, who is a rank and file member of the UAW Local 4811 at the UC San Diego campus. This comrade called in, and we'll be hearing from him throughout the episode.
UAW 4811 represents the student workers. So that's, graduate student researchers, TAs, postdocs, academic researchers, et cetera. There are faculty members, some of whom were arrested and many of whom are now condemning the chancellor for this extremely brutal and overreaction. So the vote was held last week from Monday the 13th through the 15th. So people had, 3 days to vote. And it ended up passing with 79% support. So, a super majority of students that voted in the election, very overwhelmingly supported going on strike in solidarity with the people that were attacked and arrested and are being threatened with suspensions by the university for exercising the right to free speech and for speaking out against injustice in the world.
So we have Tom Trottier here with us in New York City. Antonio Balmer as well. And I'm Laura Brown. So let's get right into it. We've been basically witnessing this inspiring movement of the encampments across some 150 campuses around the US. And they've been brutally cracked down in pretty much every single occasion. And now we see this is a massive escalation. The fact that from the encampments, now the battlefield has shifted to labor, to organized labor and this political strike. So, Antonio, can you explain a little bit more about the situation?
Yeah, all eyes should be on California right now, on the UCs and on the struggle of the UAW Local 4811's political strike. Political strikes are rare in this country. I can't say when's the last time that there's been a political strike that is remotely similar to this. It's one thing when workers strike over a contract or they strike as part of a unionization struggle. These workers are striking in response to state repression, and it's linked to the encampment movement, which means that this is an escalation of the Palestine solidarity movement from street protests to encampments to now strike battles. This is an open, direct political strike.
While of course, our pay and working conditions as graduate students is very important, and there's many people that are living paycheck to paycheck and not in great financial situations, we can utilize our union power to leverage much greater change than just within our university. Organizing on this scale that we're seeing now is something that is pretty unprecedented for our union. Back in 2022, during the a more typical strike when our contract ended and we were fighting for increased pay and benefits, this is very different. Now it's, oh wow, there were these students, peers of mine, friends of mine, that were brutally arrested, held in custody for over 10 hours, put into county jail, had their privacy violated, were humiliated by the police. This is not something I'm going to stand for.
This is a model that the rest of the labor movement should follow. And it's something that the entire Palestine solidarity movement internationally should be watching, studying, analyzing, and critiquing in order to help advance it. The UAW struggle right now has the potential to be another of these models that spread, another example that should spread like wildfire. And so we want to discuss how this particular struggle can escalate to a point of victory.
Mm-hmm. So what are the specifics of the vote, of the premise for the strike?
Well, there was a brutal attack against peaceful protesters at UCLA. And just to remind our listeners, that UAW 4811 represents 48,000 academic workers on 10 campuses, including UCLA. So this attack, as well as other sweeps by the police, was basically threatening the rights of the members of UAW 4811 who've been part of these peaceful demonstrations, It was a threat to their health. It was a threat to their safety. It was also a change in their working conditions because the management, the university administrators, invited the police on campus. Whenever you're in a union workplace, if there's a change in working conditions, that has to be negotiated ahead of time. There was no negotiation. This was a unilateral change of working conditions by management. And also these actions were taken in retaliation to the right of those members. By the way, you're on a university, you're supposed to have free speech, freedom of inquiry, right? And the right of these people these members and their students, by the way, to peacefully protest. And in retaliation, these actions were taken by the administration. So that union had a lot of good reasons why they couldn't just take this lying down. They couldn't just allow this kind of attack to happen. Then you wouldn't have a union left. And they were also worried about their fellow students at that campus and their rights.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, obviously the university administration, the board of regents, they're saying this sets a dangerous precedent because now you have a union doing things that are not about labor rights and about bargaining, but that goes beyond that. First of all, I think that's a lie. You just explained why that's a lie. Secondly, I think that shows they're scared because that's precisely what's needed is that labor issues are social issues. They're political issues. That's precisely why a political strike is such a rare occurrence. But once it starts, I think it does set a precedent. It shows that the working class's consciousness is rising and how these issues can be connected and labor can take up these fights on a broader scale.
People are angry. I think it initially went from kind of hopelessness of, wow, there's this awful thing happening on the other side of the world and we are pretty powerless to do anything about it, to, workers organizing and saying, well, we're going to start protesting this. And then as start protesting this, people got a little bolder and that triggered a response by the university to, send in riot cops to arrest them. And I think that's only done the exact opposite of what the university wanted. And now it's just pointing a huge spotlight on the issue. And now with, the union taking pretty bold and unprecedented action, people are realizing that, we're not powerless to stop this. This is something that we can concretely put pressure on the university to make significant global change. And not just on the university, but by increasing this class consciousness of, this is not something that's just an isolated incident that we have no control over. This is something that we can really make huge change with.
Mm-hmm. This is how the class struggle is supposed to unfold, by the way. You have a tactic. In the beginning, it was months and months of protests in the streets, chanting, slogans, and that tactic reached an impasse and it wasn't achieving a result. So then you escalate, and with the encampments, that represented a tactical escalation. That was a big step forward. And then the administration summons in the police. The views of brutality that we saw at UCLA were some of the worst. I mean, dozens of these armed Zionist thugs with metal rods shooting fireworks into the crowd of peaceful protesters. And meanwhile, campus security is standing by doing nothing. The police takes hours to respond. They show up and apparently there were orders given to just stand by and let it happen. And there's been no response for this. I mean, I think UCLA has called in a police inquiry, a police consulting firm to look into it. We should have no trust in any kind of investigation that is being carried out by the police, by the UC regents. Actually, this is an issue that the labor movement itself should be taking up. The California Federation of Labor should be the one heading up this investigation.
I was going to say only a politician, a businessman, or some bureaucrat that lives completely remotely in a different world than the rest of us. Only they could look at this situation and say that the workers have nothing to complain about or that it's not related in some way to their working conditions. You have to really be living in a different world to believe that. But you're absolutely right. They are absolutely afraid that people are making connections. There is a connection between what these workers are facing, what these students are facing on these campuses, and even what the Palestinians are facing in the Middle East. And you know what? One of the things that's held in common here is that the enemy is the same. It's the wealthy in this country, the capitalist class, which is the cause of this problem here and cause of that problem there.
Absolutely. And first of all, in terms of the police brutality and the Zionist mobs that went in, right-wing mobs that went in, this wasn't the only place. Obviously, UCLA wasn't the only place where you had this kind of violence.
On May 6th, the people of the encampment woke up around 5:45 a.m. to shouts that police were here. When people got out of their tents, the entire encampment was surrounded by 200 to 300 police in full riot gear. They had batons, they had guns, they had quote unquote less lethal weapons, which of course can be incredibly dangerous. They had mace, they had pepper spray, they had tasers, they had bulletproof vests, full riot gear. The encampment was outnumbered 3-1. There was no chance of any sort of significant resistance, but the police essentially just kettled everybody, surrounded them, and one by one, people were grabbed and mass arrested 65 of us. People were charged with misdemeanors. It was mostly, resisting an officer and encroachment, remaining at the scene of a riot. A lot of these BS gray area charges that are frequently brought against protesters. And people were hauled off to jail for hours. A humiliating and awful booking process that is certainly going to leave scars on people's lives for just the awful things that happened. It was a pretty horrible thing for our university to have deemed a proportionate response to a peaceful encampment that was just there to protest genocide. I almost want to say I feel lucky compared to what happened at UCLA with the even more brutal crackdowns that occurred.
There's very striking images across the board, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners have already watched, of that kind of brutality in all these campuses, from Columbia to NYU to all the universities across the U.S. The University of Texas, Austin. You had the state troopers being sent in from literally across the state to heavily repress and arrest not just students, also professors and all kinds of workers. Even the press was arrested in those situations. And one that's very striking that we'd like to show is at UC Irvine, who puts it very clearly, in my opinion, and who shows how those issues are connected.
I'm a tenured professor. They're destroying the campus and undoing a democratic, peaceful protest. Shame on them. Shame on them.
And what department are you in?
I'm in the Global Studies Department.
And why are you here today?
Because we cannot have a genocidal foreign policy in a democracy. These young people are going to be the ones that have to pay the price for these horrible decisions. These police officers out here today, that's thousands of student scholarships. Thousands of students could have been able to go to school and have books and have housing. But instead, our chancellor, who is a very cruel man, decided to send thousands of dollars worth of state funding paid for by the taxpayers into the trash.
Are you concerned about this jeopardizing your job?
For real. What job do I have if the students don't have a future?
The money that's spent on cops repressing the movement and the money that's spent on funding the genocide in Gaza is money that is not spent on education, on healthcare, on higher wages, on housing in this country. So absolutely, those two issues are linked. So back to the strike. What are the demands of the strikers?
Well, their first demands, of course, is they're objecting to this unwarranted discipline and unilateral changes in working conditions. There was no due notice given to any of the employees and no proper negotiations with the union. But in addition to that, the union does have broader demands. They're asking for amnesty for all academic employees, students, student groups, faculty, staff who face disciplinary action or arrest due to protests, protecting the right to free speech and political expression on campus. Amazing that you have to fight for that, but it shows you the sham of the bourgeois democracy in this country. Divestment from the University of California's known investment in weapons manufacturers, military contractors, companies profiting from Israel's war on Gaza. By the way, I believe it's like over $3 billion of their endowment is directly in arms manufacturing.
Sorry, it's $32 billion of the endowment. That's 18% of the total endowment. Yeah. Is connected to Israel or U.S. imperialism in some way. $3 billion of that is arms manufacturing specifically.
Got it.
Incredible.
Got it. And then, of course, they also want disclosure, of the funding sources, the investments, including contracts, so grants, gifts. Of course, these are all things that are given either by the bourgeois state through the military, the Pentagon, or through wealthy capitalist individuals, right? And they want that to be publicly known instead of hiding this. By the way, it's a public university. It should be publicly known. And also empowering researchers, which includes a lot of the members of the union, to opt out from these kinds of funding sources tied to military or oppression of the Palestinians. And they call that the University of California must provide centralized transitional funding to workers whose funding is tied to the military or foundations that support Palestinian oppression.
By the way, the fact that the unions strike is not only using the premise of the unfair labor practice because of the incident of repression on April 30th, but they're also including these demands over divestment, from any Israeli-connected assets in the university. It's basically adopting a section of the demands for divestment and disclosure from the encampments and using it now as part of this strike battle. That is a very good escalation, a very good way of connecting one area of struggle into this strike battle.
I think it's, really important that people are waking up and realizing that, workers' issues and the rights of the working class and these issues that we face are all interconnected. While this started off as, a strike against unfair labor practices by the university for retaliation against us for expressing our free speech, it's now become so much more than that. One, we can point out injustice in the world and say we're not going to stand for that, but also the fact that this is not a completely isolated incident that we have nothing to do with. $32 billion, 20% of the UC's endowment. It's a huge chunk of the university's business. This is not just a little bit of money that the university is willing to give up. They're going to fight tooth and claw to hold on to their investments. People don't want to be going on strike. People don't want to, have to think about these things, but we do, because these are things that are important for people around the world. I think many people in my department, want to just put their heads down and focus on their research because that's what they came to school to do. But at the end of the day, a university is a business. And they do all of these things that we can't keep turning away from. And
it poses this question, ultimately, of workers' control and workers' power, in a sense, because the encampments already show it's not like the administration can just be pressured and they're going to stop funding U.S. imperialism. We're talking about a giant machine. U.S. imperialism has hundreds of billions of dollars invested in the Middle East. And in order to actually force the hand, really, it takes taking matters into the hands of workers themselves. We know that universities in this country, private universities, are really businesses, right? And they invest the money in whatever way that is beneficial to the profits of the ruling class and to the interests of the ruling class at large. In this case, it's public universities. And so you can see it's directly tied to the capitalist parties that run the state of California, right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, by the way, the federal government, right, the president of the United States, Joseph Biden, Genocide Joe, is a Democrat. And the Democrats control the Senate, as we know. In California, the state of California, the governor is a Democrat, Gavin Newsom, and the Democrats control both houses of the state legislature. So that's the Democratic Party in power. And by the way, they control Los Angeles and probably many of the other major cities in California as well. So it's the Democratic Party, and we make no distinction on this. Both the Democrats and the Republicans are parties of, by, and for the capitalist class. The government, whether it's the federal government or any of the state governments, are governments of, by, and for the capitalist class. We would argue that the union should put forward the vision you're talking about. This is supposed to be a public university. Make it really public. That means under the democratic control of the workers, of the students, of all those universities and campuses that make up University of California. We would argue that they should put forward a demand, a vision of a board of directors that would actually be elected, where students would be able to elect representatives, where academic staff and non-academic staff at all the campuses would get to elect representatives, and where there may be a portion of that board which would be, elected through the labor movement, through the California State Federation, to represent the working class as a whole. And those kinds of boards would make those universities truly public, truly under the control of the workers and the students of California.
And you mentioned earlier this question of the sham investigation. That's another matter that we can't leave into the hands of the capitalists and their government. We saw this during the Black Lives Matter movement as well. A lot of promises were made for change and how police were going to be more accountable and abolished or defunded. And you saw the exact opposite. In fact, we had comrades at the Minneapolis encampment, at the University of Minnesota. During 2020, they had promised that they were basically going to remove the police from campus, as far as I understand. That didn't happen. And look at how that got, that was used. The encampment was cracked down multiple times and removed multiple times through police force. So you mentioned this question as, okay, well, who should carry out this investigation, right?
Right. Of course, you can't trust the state to police the police, and you can't trust the UC and the regents, the private administration, to come in and carry out an investigation, let alone to take any measures towards actually achieving justice. The working class can only rely on its own forces to achieve that. And what that would look like is, the labor movement could call on the California Federation of Labor. That includes like 1,300 unions. That's 2.3 million organized workers in that state alone. They have the resources to carry out their own investigation, and that's exactly what they should do. They should form a commission of inquiry to look into this. And if they confirm what we all suspect, they would confirm in black and white that there was complete collusion between LAPD, the campus security, and these right-wing attackers at UCLA on April 30th, then the labor movement should pass its own sentence and carry out its own sentence, which is using the only power that the working class has, the power to strike. They should mobilize all 2.3 million workers that are unionized in that state and say this was an attack against union members. It should be the labor movement that fights back and carries out its own justice in this case.
So let's contrast that with how the strike is actually being carried out and what's going on the ground right now. So we said the UAW Local 4811 represents 48,000 workers. So far, what's been happening with the strike?
Well, the leadership of the strike is in the hands of the executive board of UAW Local 4811. Now, here I'm going to speak frankly, I think they're making a mistake. In order to make this a successful strike, what do you need to do? You need to get this message out to everybody. You got to mobilize as many people as possible, first in your local, and then look for support from other union locals and students, et cetera, and the other components of the movement. And unfortunately, the executive board took a different view on this, and they decided to do what they call a stand-up strike, which is an echo of what Shawn Fain did last fall when the UAW went on strike against General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis. The bottom line of that stand-up strike is rather than take all the workers out at once, he was only targeting certain factories one at a time or a couple at a time. And they decided to use this model for this strike, and I think that's a mistake. So they called a strike at the University of California, Santa Cruz, which is not even the place, UCLA, where the most ferocious attack happened by the reactionaries. So I think that was a mistake to, number one, to limit it to one campus. But even if you were going to limit it to one campus, at least put it at the point of attack at UCLA. I believe, I think that if the UAW 4811 had launched a 10-campus strike, they would have got much more attention. There would have been much more of a chance to mobilize larger sections of the labor movement, larger sections of the public, and that's what you need. This thing, in order to succeed, needs to spread. If you keep it quiet, if it's small, if people don't see what's going on, that's not good for this strike.
Mm-hmm. And let's hear from our comrade on the ground who explains how this is being carried out.
So the general structure of the union is that, there's kind of the overall leadership, the executive board. From my understanding, they're mainly the ones that are in charge of deciding which of the campuses is going to be next to go up on the stand-up strike. So what happened last time with Santa Cruz is they made an announcement on Friday morning of last week saying, Santa Cruz, we're calling on you to be the first school to stand up. You have essentially over the weekend to prepare, and then 9 a.m. Monday morning, we're starting the strike. And presumably that's what's going to happen week after week. Yeah, but I mean, like what you're saying about the stand-up strike, I certainly agree that, I think union power comes from our collective action and our large numbers. And I was a little surprised to see that, two things, one, that it's going campus by campus, the three campuses, UCLA, UC San Diego, and UC Irvine, that had mass arrests occur. None of the three of us were in the initial wave. I figure that we're going to be next, but I was a little surprised by splitting us up and having us come on, one at a time. It does kind of weaken our power a little bit. And secondly, also, I think by announcing an end date to the strike, that also gives the university, a kind of deadline, which I think is maybe not the best idea.
A month ago, when you had these encampments, the administration across the country was looking at them, hoping that they were going to die down in time for graduation and that the summer break was coming, the end of the spring term is happening. That's part of the context for this strike. I mean, 4811 should look at that and say, this term for the UCs ends at the end of June. You don't have a lot of time to make the big impact that you need to make. So there's no time for slow rolling this one campus at a time with the stand-up strike method. And a lot of workers are understandably getting impatient with that. We've seen signs of workers from UCLA. There was a statement put out by the rank and file for a Democratic Union. They've been calling for it. Said, do UCLA next. That they've already had assemblies of union members resolving that they're ready to strike right now. They don't want to be held back. And, one of the things that they said is that the leadership is insisting on absolute secrecy about the timeline and locations of the strikes. They say that this is in order to maximize chaos. But at present, they are only causing chaos and confusion among our own ranks. Rank and file members currently have no idea when or if we're going to be called to strike, yet our union bylaws affirm that the membership is the highest authority in the union. You had the same sorts of complaints coming from last fall's strike against the automakers. The stand-up strike is not a good way of maximizing the impact of the one power that workers have to paralyze production, in this case, to really shut down the entire operations of the UCs. That's what they should be trying to do.
The school year is, my understanding, it ends on June 30th at the university. You gotta strike now. If they wait till July, the schools are going to be closed. So they got to strike now. I really think this is a mistake. And if you really want to have a successful strike, how do you do it? You need mass participation. The working class, the workers on those campuses, must feel their strength. How do you feel your strength? You feel your strength by bringing people together. That 4811 would do well if they called mass meetings, mass strike meetings on each of their campuses. Like just to give you an example, I think in University of California, San Diego, they have about 6,000 members. Imagine if at least 500 of them showed up to a mass meeting. At those mass meetings, they can discuss the goals of the strike, the tactics of the strike, what they need to do, all the follow-up that needs, and they could elect representatives, a strike committee. Now, by the way, some people may say, "Oh, well, it's the executive board or the executive committee that's supposed to run the strike." Well, we can have a strike committee at each campus. They can also elect representatives from each campus or the 10 campuses. And we'd have a united overall strike committee. And nobody is stopping the people from the executive board for running for that, right? And of course, because they're acknowledged leaders, they very may well get elected into those committee positions. But then that strike committee not only has to have the responsibility of running things, but then they have to report back to these mass meetings. So the workers have control over this. There is no way to win a strike unless you have mass participation. You can't just order people. You have to include them as part of that.
And I think a lot of the workers and a lot of the students and student workers in this union would be ready to take up this fight. I mean, it's a very present issue. A lot of them participated in the encampments or supported them, or they witnessed the brutality. I think there's a mood for it.
The amount of students that are willing to step up and help doing organizing for the union to ensure that we have the maximum amount of power and leverage that we do is unlike anything I'd seen before. There's so many more students coming to organizing meetings and getting ready to, let's go on a walk through a building, let's go postering, let's go talk to students, let's go, get people signed up if they're not already in the union. there really is some mass action that I'm seeing here that I have not seen in my entire time at UCSD.
UAW 4811 is not the only union on campus. There's actually currently the union that represents service workers and other skilled workers of the campus. Is AFSCME, and their contract is about to end. They're in the middle of basically fighting for concrete demands for a higher minimum wage of $25 an hour and other demands. And they have been holding rallies on campus for this issue. Well, those two things need to be linked up. AFSCME yesterday held rallies, planned rallies just about this issue of the higher wages. Well, what if UAW, through those mass assemblies, elected people or just called on people to attend that rally, asked to speak there, make an appeal, basically send organized detachments to connect with all the other unions on campus and to gather that kind of mass support and actually have AFSCME, UAW, any other unions, and any other workers and students to work together to shut the campus down and make a big, big impact. And then from there, you can actually make an appeal beyond the campuses to all of the workers in the state of California and beyond to the whole country. And we know, again, there is a mood because the encampments was a nationwide movement. It's an international movement. There's encampments happening right now in Britain, in Italy, even in Japan, there have been encampments, right? So there is a mood for this, and this could spread like wildfire if this kind of lead was given.
Right. AFSCME 3299 has 30,000 workers that are organized. These are the workers that are at the UC campuses. They're doing, service jobs. Mm-hmm. They're doing skilled, some of these are skilled technical workers in patient care. They're playing a very critical role on the campuses. And the fact that they're having their negotiations being unfairly treated by the UCs, the thing is, we should understand the UC regents, the capitalists at the head of the UC system, they're trying to screw the students, they're trying to screw the faculty, and they're trying to screw these service workers. If all of these come together and realize they have a common enemy and use class war tactics to respond, there's no reason there's not a full-fledged united front in this strike battle between AFSCME 3299, UAW 4811. By the way, there's other unions that they're stepping into this fight. The University Council, AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, organizes 6,500 UC faculty and librarians. They have filed their own unfair labor practice against the UCs along the same lines as UAW 4811. So they're stepping into the fight. What else? The university professional and technical employees, that's 20,000 workers organized in UPTE. CWA 9119 is another union of UC workers that has come out with a resolution in solidarity with 4811. So have the United Steelworkers Local 675. There is a mood of support and sympathy for this. People are angry because of the scenes that they saw. So this is a key moment. UAW 4811 should be looking at this very carefully and thinking about how to maximize and make that solidarity from something that people just feel in general terms, that should be harnessed into action. You know, AFSCME has actually called on its members to, during their lunch breaks, they said, we're not on strike, but you should show up to the picket line, show your support. What if we had groups of workers organized within AFSCME? I know that we actually have a comrade on the ground at least one of the campuses in California, agitating and organizing to have strike action linked up with UAW and bring in the demands of the contract together with the demands of these 4811, bring this stuff together, make it one fight that's fought, with full forces. I
know that the San Diego chapter of the RCA has been, doing a lot of outreach to unions that are organizing like this and working to connect, these movements as part of a broader labor struggle. As far as I know, there hasn't been specifically, at least within my department, specific organizing of UAW to collaborate with other unions, but certainly hope that does occur soon.
What's also interesting is that coincidentally, the United Auto Workers, led by Shawn Fain, when they had the auto strikes in the fall, in all the contracts, they're expiring on April 30th, 2028. And the reason they're expiring on that is Shawn Fain has this idea, and I believe they've released the video about this, where he's calling for this idea of a general strike on May 1st of 2028.
We set a new contract deadline for May the 1st, 2028.
We invite unions around the country to align your contract expirations with our own.
We want a general strike. We want everybody walking out, just like they do in other countries.
Together, we can begin to flex our collective muscle.
Now, that's a great thing. That would be great to have a general strike on May 1st of 2028. But we would also ask this question: why wait? Especially when we have this momentum now, and he's got one important local of his own union is facing a fight of its life, so to speak. This is the time for Shawn Fain and the UAW to also appeal to other unions and to start talking about a general strike in the United States. Imagine if all the unions went out on a general strike in the United States over this issue, how that would rock the American capitalist establishment. Both Genocide Joe would be on notice. Trump, if he gets elected, would be on notice. The labor movement would be flexing the power, would be showing the potential power that it has, even if it just was a one-day general strike on this issue.
Absolutely. And let's remember that Shawn Fain was leading the strike of the auto workers last year against the big three auto companies in the U.S. And that was where this stand-up strategy first came about, right? To strike, basically checkerboard, like strike only one location at a time or just a few locations at a time. But in spite of that, they did, because there was such a pressure from the workers, in spite of this more limited strategy, they did get a significant pay increase compared to a lot of the other sectors of the working class. I think Shawn Fain has become, up to a certain point, a point of reference. If he made a call like that, it would have a huge impact. Also, the UAW workers at the UCs, 2 years ago, in 2022, or less than 2 years ago, they went on what was at the time one of the largest, or one of the largest, maybe the largest strike of academic workers in the history of this country. So they've gone through that experience. Our comrade was actually who has been calling in. He was a part of that strike movement. So there's lessons there, I'm sure, that those workers learned. There is a mood to fight back, and this could be organized with the right lead being given.
I want to address this question of legality, because this is going to come up when people start talking about general strikes, or whether I think the University of California administration is claiming that UAW 4811 is violating labor law and all that. The labor movement has to take this on. When we talk about legality, we're talking about bourgeois legality. That's the government, the capitalist government, the class enemy passes laws, and they dictate to us what is legal and what is illegal, what is within the rules and what is without the rules. And the labor movement should first understand that we will not be dictated to by the class enemy. We have an absolute right to strike. We have a right to stop our labor when we choose to stop our labor.
Yeah, I mean, if everyone was following the law all the time, protests would never, ever, have any leverage and be able to do anything. During the civil rights era, Martin Luther King wasn't following the law. Rosa Parks wasn't following the law. That's how rights are won. That's how we advance as workers and ensure that we have more and more rights. If we just complied with the police, then we would have just gone away and nothing would have ever changed and there would be no strike.
Now, Antonio, earlier you talked about the rank and file for a Democratic Union at UCLA. We can see that there's impatience, there's a will to fight, and they make some proposals there. Are some of those proposals, do they point the way forward?
Well, I think they're putting forward a lot of proposals that we agree with. I mean, the big thing that you're seeing these rank and file workers express is impatience for action, and they want to shut down the campuses. And understandably, I think that's the mood on the ground. I think you have an activation of the ranks. They want to fight. They don't want to be held back. But one of the things that we're seeing is that they're saying there are a variety of tactics that could be used right now. We have members who are willing to take certain risks, have disruptive actions that will help shut down the campus. And it basically sounds like they're talking about activating limited numbers of the ranks to perhaps sabotage campus operations or something like that. I think we would say, look, this is a healthy instinct. You want to have an effective strike. You want to shut it down. For many years, the labor leaders haven't treated strike action as a real strike, as a real intention to shut down the operations. But what you want to do is use the numbers and the strength and numbers of the entire, UAW 4811. You have 48,000 workers, not to mention the 30,000 in AFSCME. I mean,
Plus the students who are not workers.
Plus a
but
lot
who
of students.
Stand in solidarity.
That's right. Everyone who just went through the experience of the encampments, and non-students also. Look, there's an entire movement behind this. We should be looking at those numbers and activating those forces. But for that, you need a lot of organization. And that's the harder part. You can't really improvise mass organization once a battle like this breaks out. You need to have, I agree with the sentiment of these rank and file workers. I think a lot of them probably are communists, by the way. In this day and age, when you're talking with class war perspectives, we know we can spot that. And we should be open about that. I mean, the comrade we were speaking to from San Diego was saying there's a lot of communists out on the encampments as well. But you need communist organization if you want to have a class war strategy that can actually unfold and win over the workers, because it's no good having a small group of advanced union militants that start to cut themselves off from the rest of the ranks. You need to have measures in place and organization sinking roots and winning over the rest of the union. And so that's the tricky tactical part, that you don't do that simply by saying the union leadership is betraying us. The union leadership is holding us back. That may be true, but how do you put these things forward in a way that you can win over the ranks of the rest of the union and show what is a fighting way forward? I mean, let's put this in positive terms. We have an opportunity here to fight and to win. You could see victory within our reach, but that's only going to become a reality if we really mobilize our full forces and if we take this strike battle seriously. This can't be improvised over Slack messages and emails and calling people out. Like Tom was saying, we need mass rallies, mass assemblies of all the union ranks on all the campuses ASAP. I mean, that's the kind of urgent operation that the union leadership should be putting forward.
Can I also just say, I think the comrade from San Diego, who's a member of 4811, he mentioned that even with some of the hesitation by the executive board, he noticed really an upsurge of people becoming active in the union and talking about the union and getting involved in this. It shows the potential that we have here. We can't miss this potential to turn this movement into something that could actually win.
Absolutely. And I think the time is right. And it's not just about, again, this union or that union. This is also part of the general shift we are seeing toward communism, against capitalism, the general radicalization, polarization, the anger that's present in society against the system, against Genocide Joe, against the status quo, and against also explicitly the genocidal slaughter of the people of Gaza. Over 35,000 people murdered with the full backing, with the very necessary support of U.S. imperialism.
I'm a Jewish American. I was raised by Zionist parents with this idea of Israel as our homeland and this, haven in the Middle East, surrounded by enemies that want to destroy it. But this is our homeland, and this is, an amazing place. And that was the belief I held for most of my life. And I think, in the past couple of years, I've really had that vision that was given to me has been challenged repeatedly. And I think any last illusions that I had with it was completely shattered back in October of 2023, with just the absolute devastation that the Israeli government is wreaking on Gaza. And as a Jewish American, I say not in my name. This is not something that I want being done for me. This is not for me. I have much more in common with the people of Gaza than I do with the ruling class of Israel and with the ruling class of the United States.
A lot of people can sympathize with this. A lot of our listeners actually may have gone through the same experience or a very similar experience. And that's the kind of sentiment that's pushing people to get organized, to join the party, to build the party wherever you are.
I am a communist. When I was participating in the encampment, there were many people around me that they were openly announcing they were communists, which was something that I didn't know before, which is really inspiring to hear. This is not some small movement. This is not something that is just a fringe radical group. There are many communists in the United States who want to see serious change enacted. And I do believe we will have a revolution in our lifetime.
And we would encourage anyone who is listening, if you haven't taken that step yet, then do that now. Get involved, get organized. Let's build a party that can overthrow U.S. imperialism and carry out a revolution in our lifetime.
The one thing is that it's always better whenever an opportunity comes about, like a movement like this is an opportunity that could really push back the ruling class and could be really a step forward towards the building of a real opposition, which could bring about socialism. And but it's always better to go into battle prepared. And in order to be prepared, you do need a leadership. You do need a party. So right now, the main task facing anyone who's serious, who really wants to seriously change the system, who really wants to seriously defeat imperialism, who really seriously would like to see a socialism in this country and workers' democracy, they have to build the party. They have, and you're at a good time if you're interested in doing that, because the Revolutionary Communists of America, we're going to have our founding Congress at the end of July. And I don't think you'd want to miss that, being part of that historic founding Congress. From that Congress, you know, in a few years, we can build something that could eventually become a mass party. And once we're a mass party, the working class will have an alternative. A lot of workers are not happy with their present union leadership, but there is no alternative. We have to build that alternative. You have to help us build that alternative. You have to be part of that.
I would add that in the period ahead of us, there's going to be a lot more of these kinds of opportunities, of these kinds of battles. But the only way for these opportunities to actually be seized and to lead to victory is if you have organization in place. And again, that cannot be improvised in the moment. We need to sink roots. We need organized communist cells in all of these unions to bring a very clear message into it. Because I think the Palestine Solidarity Movement largely understands that the only way to stop the flow of funds, of weapons to Israel, the only way to really cut off this genocidal slaughter is to have action that disrupts the flow physically. It's the power of the working class. But how do you get the workers to understand that this is their issue? That's been something that's been left on abstract level up until now, up until the UAW took it up and said, this is the issue of the working class. And I think that if you want to have that message coming in systematically into all the industries where it really matters, you're going to need communists. You're going to need people who understand things in class terms, who can bring class politics into the workplace. It's not going to happen just automatically. And that's why we need, communist cells within AFSCME right now to be linking up their struggle with the struggle of UAW 4811. You need communist cells within the UCs, within the faculty, within the grad students. We need communist cells in every corner, in every industry of the labor movement. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from the experience of the encampments, from the whole experience of the protest movement up until now. You need that organization and preparation in place in advance. And the time to build it is now. The time to sink those roots, train those cadres, bring that Marxist framework, the political education. All of that needs to happen urgently. And there's going to be opportunities in the future for us to seize those moments if we prepare for it right now.
And we're not starting from nothing. I think we have cells at UC San Diego, UC Irvine, and a bunch of other, I forget all the lists of it, but at other universities in California. And we want to spread that, and we want to build more of these cells.